With the Clippers having their most embarrassing moment in franchise history this past postseason, it really begs the question, what are the moves they should make to retool this roster in an attempt to position this franchise in better positioning to win an NBA championship? Or I guess for the Clippers, make the conference finals. And in this video, I believe that trading Paul George just might be a part of that plan. But Paul George was coming off of an MVP caliber season in OKC during the 2019 NBA season, and after finishing third in the MVP race as well as top 5 in Defensive Player of the Year voting, PG was traded to the Los Angeles Clippers in an attempt to pair him with Kawhi Leonard in order to form a championship roster. And despite injuries being a consistent factor that limited him to only 48 games played in less than 30 minutes per contest, he still had a relatively decent regular season, as he averaged 22 points and 6 rebounds as well as 4 assists, with shooting splits of 44% from the field, 41% from behind the arc on nearly 8 attempts a game, and also shot 88% from the free throw line. Not only were his exploits good on the offensive end, but even defensively he continued the theme of playing it at an elite level. But the issue with PG this past year was not what happened in the regular season, because as soon as the playoffs started in the bubble, Paul George turned into one of the worst players I have ever seen in my entire life. Because in the first round against a Mavericks team that didn't have Porzingis for a good portion of the series, PG would average just short of 19 points per contest along with 7 rebounds and 4 assists on some of the worst shooting splits of his entire career, shooting below 36% from the field and 27% from behind the arc on nearly 9 attempts a game. And to fully grasp just how terrible he was in that series, he had 3 games in which he shot below 30% from the field, not from 3, but from the field. And in those games, he shot 20% or less from behind the arc as well. So to put it in simpler terms, Paul George just straight up choked. And honestly, Paul George has a history of choking, but it isn't this bad. PG was putting up Bob Cousy levels of efficiency here. And I know a lot of people are going to say that, hey, in the second round, he did play well, right? Well, honestly, I don't agree with that notion, because sure, on the defensive end, he definitely did contribute and had some solid shooting performances over the course of that series. But in the second half of the last 3 games, which is when his
for 17 and 2 for 10
He's
in
MP,
game 2.
missing in person.
team needed him the most, he played like complete and utter garbage. And he concluded that series with one of the worst performances of his life in game 7 with a 10-point game while shooting, get this, 4 of 16 from the field, which is 25%, and 2 of 11 from behind the arc, which is 18%. And to even make matters worse, not only did he only attempt 1 free throw throughout the entire game and miss that free throw ironically, but it demonstrated a lack of aggressiveness. Paul George was clearly rattled by a game 7, and I have to say this because I'm not one for speculation and hyperbole, but it's clear that Paul George's mental state is the biggest issue with his game, because when you look at his ability and skill set as a whole, he has all the tools to not only be a Hall of Famer, because I think that's even limiting what he could do, but to even be a top 50 player in NBA history. That's just how talented I believe Paul George is. So for him to underperform and shoot just as terrible as he did, especially in the first round and in game 7, hell, even in the second half of the last 3 games in the conference semifinals, it just goes to show a lack of mental strength. Because not only does he have the history behind him to prove it, but he himself has even come out and admitted that mentally he's not at the place that he should be, and his teammates kind of had to help him through it, especially in the first round against the Dallas Mavericks. And also, let's not forget, this guy turned off his Instagram comments because of all the hate that he was receiving due to his terrible play in the first round, even making a post saying that people shouldn't even be thinking about him in the first place. And honestly, it just goes to show where his head is at. And let's not forget, this is a guy that said he's no James Harden in response to him playing bad in the playoffs. How can you come out and say you're not as good as another guy and that's the reason why you can't score as much or as efficiently as we all know you're capable of doing on a night-to-night basis. It goes to show not only where Paul George is in the NBA standings among the greatest players in the league today from our perspective, but even from his own. He doesn't see himself on that level, so he's not going to play on that level, which leads into my topic for this video, the future of Paul George looking very bleak right now. And the reason I believe that is because I think that they need to make a trade for Paul George. I'm sorry, PG is a very talented player and is one of the 10 best players at his position and is a top 20 player in this league. We all know what he's capable of on both ends of the ball, one of the best two-way players that the NBA has seen over the last 10 to 15 years. But the issue is not what he's able to bring on a night-to-night basis in the regular season, it's how it transfers into the postseason. And over the course of his career, and even in this short year that we've seen, Paul George is just unable to translate that game into the biggest moments that you need him the most. And trust me, Kawhi Leonard is not blameless. Shooting as terrible as he did in the second half of Game 7 is inexcusable. But at the end of the day, he doesn't have a history of playing like this in the biggest moments. Paul George does. And considering that he's the one that you gave your entire future away just for a chance to win a championship, you gotta move on from him, because it's clear that he is not the guy that they thought they were trading for. And that really begs the question, what trade package should the Clippers throw to teams in order to get some solid compensation? I've heard teams such as the Brooklyn Nets, they definitely do have the assets to get PG, and I've also heard the Denver Nuggets. And to be quite fair, I actually think the latter is better than the former, because the Nets, really, what are their assets? Taurean Prince, Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert. Only one of those players are somebody that I would want if I was a Clippers fan or even in that Clippers front office, and that's Karis LeVert. And as good as I think he is, I gotta be real with you, he's not good enough to be the main centerpiece of a Paul George trade unless they're giving up a whole bunch of draft picks, and I think the Nets front office has learned from trading future draft picks in exchange for an aging star. But then that begs the question, what about the Denver Nuggets? And I know it'd be pretty ironic for Paul George to go to the team that just beat him, but it is a trade and it's not a free agency signing, so I don't want to hear any Kevin Durant fans try to liken both moves. Now, as far as the trade package, you gotta throw Gary Harris in there because you need to get some type of elite defensive compensation because you're losing one of the greatest defenders in the league today in PG-13. Now, as far as the other things involved in the trade, you could throw in guys like Monte Morris and Will Barton, but I believe if you're the Los Angeles Clippers, the one guy that you want on that team is Jeremy Grant, because you're not going to get Michael Porter Jr. I just don't see the Nuggets letting go of him yet. And as far as the other young players, I just believe that Jeremy Grant would help this team far more due to his defensive versatility and his up-and-coming offensive talent growing. Even at the age of 26, he may have peaked for all we know, but he's still getting better year in and year out. Now, the only issue with getting Jeremy Grant is that he's going to have a player option this upcoming year worth about $9 million. And because he did have a very impressive showing this past postseason, it's going to be very interesting to see the contracts that are thrown his way and if he's going to elect to take that player's option or opt out to get more money. But regardless, I believe throwing Gary Harris as well as a first-round draft pick, whether it's the one they got from Houston or their draft pick, I definitely believe that